Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Beverly and this is my channel. So today we're actually going to be talking about a spooky case since tomorrow my time is Halloween. I'm not sure when this video will be going up. It could possibly be going up on Halloween. But today we are going to be discussing a rather spooky case. It's a pretty famous case actually, and I'll let you know what it is here in a minute. But before I get started, I want to just make sure I say my regular disclaimer, and that is that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anybody I mention or speak about in this video. This is all just information that I found online and in documentaries, etc., and I've compiled into one video for your viewing pleasure. So today, the case we're going to be discussing is a case around the Black Dahlia. It's the case of the Black Dahlia. Now, if you guys don't know who the Black Dahlia is, that's crazy to me because it is a rather famous case, but if you don't know who that is, it was a woman in 1940s named Elizabeth Short, and she was actually called the Black Dahlia by all of her friends. Around that same time frame, there was a movie that came out called The Blue Dahlia, and since Elizabeth tended to wear black mostly all the time, her friends just referred to her as the Black Dahlia as kind of a little inside joke or a nickname, if you will. So that is why this case is called the case of the Black Dahlia, because her friends referred to her as the Black Dahlia. But Elizabeth actually preferred to go by Beth, so that's what I'm going to be referring to her by through this video. So Beth was actually originally from Massachusetts, and she had moved to Hollywood to become an actress, and that's where this case actually takes place, is Hollywood, California. And she had actually moved there from Massachusetts to become an actress, which was her big dream. And back then, a lot of women wanted to be movie stars, and if you wanted to be a movie star, you had to live in Hollywood to get all the best roles. Beth was born on July 29th, 1924 in Hyde Park, Massachusetts, to her parents Cleo and Phoebe Short. She was always described as such a beautiful child, and as she got older, she blossomed into a beautiful woman. I'll insert some photos here, but she definitely was a model-esque, beautiful, 20s styled woman. So in 1929, Beth's father actually ended up abandoning her and her mother. And when I say abandon, he not only left them, but he actually faked his own suicide, which you can imagine as a child, that's just insane. So years later, and it gets crazier, years later down the road, her father actually sent Beth a letter, admitting to faking his suicide and that he was alive this whole time and that he was just so depressed he had to get out. And Beth and her father actually ended up writing letters back and forth to one another for a while, and her father actually lived in California. And eventually he asked Beth to move down there and stay with him so that they could be, closer and have that father-daughter relationship. So Beth actually agreed because, as I said, her dream was to be a model and to be an actress. So she moved down to California with her father, and right off the bat, things kind of were rocky between Beth and her father. Her father was kind of verbally abusive and also mentioned that Beth, a couple times to Beth, that she was a freeloader and told her that she didn't do the dishes right and didn't clean like she should as a woman in the 40s. And it was a different time back then, so she was expected to do those things if she was going to stay with her father. And so eventually he actually ended up kicking Beth out of his house. So after he kicked her out of his house, Beth decided to kind of couch hop from friend to friend, and sadly enough to say, a lot of these friends actually said the same thing, that she was freeloading, and she kind of overstayed her welcome, didn't really understand when it's time to go, it's time to go. So they felt like maybe she was taking advantage of them. So I want to mention a person that I'm just going to kind of throw into the story here, and his name is Redman Lee. And I believe his full name is Robert, but don't quote me on that, I can't remember. But he went by Redman Lee. And he was actually Beth's friend, so he says. So he says that their relationship was completely platonic and that they were just friends. He actually had a wife and a child. that were not Beth. So it's completely possible, but he's actually the last person to ever see Beth alive. So on January 8th, 1947, Beth actually got a ride to the Biltmore Hotel in California from Red, the guy that I mentioned before, Redman Lee. And they had dinner together and ended up going up to Beth's room in the Biltmore together. And according to Red, he slept in the bed, and Beth had said she was not feeling well, so she slept in a chair in the hotel room. But that is, word of mouth. That's according to Red. So in the morning, Red ended up getting up, and Beth wasn't in the room, so he got dressed and got ready to leave, and he stated that the last time he saw her was in the hotel lobby making phone calls, and that's the last time he saw her. He left the hotel, and that was that. So now I'm going to introduce another person into the story, and her name is Betty Bersinger. I hope I'm saying that right, or Bersinger. And on January 15th, 1947, Betty left her home with her young daughter to go to an auto shop, like an auto body shop for her, I'm assuming to pick up her car, because they actually walked there. And as she was coming up to the corner of Wharton, I'm not sure, and 39th Street, she actually saw what she thought was a mannequin and some trash beside the sidewalk. And I'll try to include a photo of kind of the area so that you guys can kind of see what I mean, like right off the sidewalk, as if you're walking down the sidewalk. To her right, she saw what she thought was a mannequin, because it was a very pale white, and it turned out to be a woman's body, and it was the body of Beth. So the reason she thought it was a mannequin was because she was so pale and white, and she was actually dismembered, and I will get into that in a minute. But as soon as Betty figured out that it was a body, she grabbed her daughter, and she actually ran to a neighbor's house and called 911 immediately. And so when the police arrived, they ended up covering Betty's body, but what they found was so gruesome, and this is why this case is so famous, because it was just such a gruesome account. And I, for respect's sake, will not include any actual photos of the body other than a covered photo of the body, for obvious purposes. I just would hate to be disrespectful to the family or anything like that, and even though this is an old case. And if you guys want to see those pictures, I mean, all you have to do is Google it. Unfortunately. The police got there, they actually found Beth's body dismembered, and when I say dismembered, I mean she was cut from her mid-stomach in half, completely in half. She was completely naked. All the blood in her body was gone, had been drained from her body, which is why her body was so pale and mannequin-like, and why Betty thought it was a mannequin at first. And actually, she had her mouth sliced open from her sides of her lips up, like kind of like a Joker smile. And again, there are pictures online if you want to see that, but I will not be including any photos aside from the one photo of her body. So after the police got there and covered her body, a crowd quickly formed, and I actually will include a photo of the crowd that formed around her body. Somebody was taking photos during the issue, and they actually ended up having to, because her body was so mutilated, they had to identify her via fingerprints, and it was identified, the body was identified as that of Elizabeth Short. So because of the way her body was kind of posed, the coroner actually decided to do a sperm test on her and test her entire body for any sperm or sexual assault, and they actually came back negative, so they didn't find anything of the sort on her body, which is strange because she was naked and she was posed as if whoever left her there definitely wanted her to be found that way, which suggests a sexual motive, but they never found any kind of anything like that on her body. So Today, this actually remains an unsolved murder case. That's crazy to me. It's happened in the 40s and it's still unsolved. So if you're wondering why I look different and the lighting is different, the setup is different, and my kid is sitting here, it's because my camera decided to ixnay half of the video I just filmed. So thankfully I'm still dressed and like presentable. So I'm gonna have to refilm half of the video for you guys. I really want to make sure that this video gets up for you, so I'm going to do so. So even though they had already identified her body due to her fingerprints, they had to have a second identification for some reason, so they ended up having to have her mother, Beth's mother, fly out and identify her body face to face. And as a mother, I can't even imagine having to identify my child's body. It's just so sad to me. As my child comes up behind me. Sadly, this is actually not how her mother found out about her death. Her mother didn't find out from the police. Her mother found out because a reporter actually wanted to run a story on Elizabeth on her murder. And so in order to get more information about Beth, the reporter called Beth's mother and told her mother that Elizabeth had actually won a prize in a beauty contest, that they were going to write an article on her for the beauty contest, saying good things, and they wanted to have more information on her for this article that they were going to write. And not till the end of the phone call did the guy finally tell her, or woman, I'm not sure who called her, but they finally told her at the very end of the call after that it was all a lie and that her daughter was actually dead. And that's when her mother found out. Days after Beth's body was found, there was actually a letter that was sent to the police department, and it read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings, letter to follow." The letter was actually soaked in gasoline as to destroy trace evidence or fingerprints, and it was sent with some of her belongings. And in her belongings were included a birth certificate, a social security number, photos, and an address book. And as they stated later in the letter that there would be a second letter to follow, I could not find anywhere online what the second letter actually said, but there was a second letter sent to the police department. And there are photos of the envelope that the letter was sent in, which I will include later in the video for reasons you'll see. So let's get into suspects. The first suspect was obviously Redman Lee, because he was the last person to be seen with Beth and because of their relationship. So another reason that Red was actually ruled out as a suspect later on is that he was actually in San Diego at the time of Beth's murder, so it couldn't have been him. Also, they did run a polygraph test on him. He did agree to do a polygraph test, which, as I've said before, polygraph tests are not 100%. They're not 100%. And a lot of the times that's why they're thrown out in court. Anyway, he ended up being ruled out as a suspect. So the next person I want to discuss as a suspect was Joseph Damias, or Damias. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I think it's Damias. And he actually claimed to be blackout drunk at the time of her murder. And the reason that he was even a suspect in the first place is because he actually came to police and confessed to being her killer. But it was actually later disproved because he was currently clocked in at a military base at the time of Beth's murder. So I know that sounds crazy that somebody would falsely accuse themselves of being the murderer of somebody else, but you'd be surprised how often that actually happens. There's been a couple cases, and I'm sure I'll cover some of those later on. But it's just crazy to me that that would happen. I thought I would just mention that there was somebody that actually claimed to murder her and didn't. In the meantime, the police department was actually getting random calls from people, not just Joseph, saying that they were the Dahlia killer or that they knew who killed her, and none of these leads actually panned out to anything important. So the last suspect I want to talk about is George Hodel. And the reason George is a suspect is because his son Stephen has actually, on several occasions, tried to prove that his father George killed Beth. And I know that sounds nuts, because what kind of kid would try to prove that their father killed somebody. But the reason he's tried to prove it is because there's been, you know, some evidence that he thinks is evidence. So starting off, the first thing that needs to be mentioned is that apparently when Stephen was growing up, he said that George Hodel, his father, had kept a secret room in their home, and he was never allowed to enter the room. Nobody was allowed to enter this room. That it was very suspicious. So another reason that Stephen said George had to have been guilty is that George actually went to medical school. So the way that Beth's body was cut up seems very valid that it would have been somebody who went to medical school. Another pretty valid reason that Stephen would suspect his father George is that George actually had 2 photos of a woman that very, very much looked like Beth. I actually did a comparison between the photos that Stephen found in his father's belongings, and this was after George Hodel had died. They did a comparison of the photos, and back when they first did the comparison, it was found to be an 85% match that it was in fact Beth in the photos. But later they re-examined the photos more recently, and they actually have now said that it is a 95% match. So it's very, very likely that even if George Hodel didn't kill Beth, he had something to do with her death or had something to do with her in general. Another thing to mention is George's handwriting very closely resembles the handwriting on the second letter that was sent to the police office, and I say very closely. I'll put up a picture. I'm not sure if they ever actually like scientifically compared the handwriting, but I'll put up a picture of their 2 handwriting next to each other, and it seems very, very close. Before George died, the police actually set up secret listening devices in his home and in places that they knew he'd be talking. Through these listening devices, they actually heard him say some pretty, I don't know, skeevy things, and they ended up arresting him, but didn't have anything further to hold him on, so he was released. But one of the things he said was that he'd like to make a connection in the DA's office, and that's, you know, that could have just been him talking, but it does seem awfully suspicious, like maybe the DA was involved in this case more than they liked to admit, or something like that. Maybe there was some corruption happening, but that's just a conspiracy. And then another thing that he said was that even if he did kill the Black Dahlia, it couldn't be proven now, meaning that she was dead. So nobody could prove it now. So at a later date, George's son Stephen actually brought in cadaver dogs to the home where he grew up and took them into that secret room that had been locked that he was never allowed to be in, and the cadaver dogs found the scent of dead bodies. I'm not sure if this was ever followed up on more, but how could they follow up on it anymore? It's been years past. This was later, I don't know, I just find that really interesting. Like, who knows, maybe this guy was actually a serial killer and we just didn't know it, and maybe if he hadn't died when he would have killed again, which is awful to say, but maybe we could have caught him or he would have been caught because maybe he would have left more evidence. I don't know, it's all just very strange. So that is pretty much it, guys. I know that's not that much information for such a famous case, but sadly to say, they never found her killer, and they never found any more evidence, pointing towards her killer. So that's pretty much it. But maybe at a later date we'll finally get justice and find out who murdered Beth. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate when you guys watch these videos, and I would love to hear you guys' feedback. Please leave any feedback or suggestions for any further cases you'd like me to talk about or cover in the I almost said description box, in the comment section below. And I will make sure to link where I get all my information in the description box as always. And thank you guys so much for watching again. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button.